Antwerp Mansion.
Okay. Andy Mansion has a certain ring to it. I mean, is that obviously is that your proper name?
It is now, but it started as a nickname.
Right.
And because everybody was calling me Andy Mansion, it became my surname, and now my daughter is called Scarlett Mansion. So yeah, it's a family name now.
Right. And how long have you actually owned Antwerp?
15 years or so.
Right.
Wow.
Okay.
That's pretty
So Antwerp was built, I believe, in the 1840s. Is that correct?
1840. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously over the years it's developed from what it was back then to what it is now.
Yeah.
We spoke with the man who let us in, and he said that it's been a nightclub, it's been the Belgium consulate. Apparently Winston Churchill has been here. I mean, obviously you're nodding your head, so obviously you can. I mean, is there anything else? Is there anything else that you can tell me about this place that he hasn't?
Yes, lots. But the problem is, if I start telling you more about the history of the house,
Be here all week.
because I do know it, I will then start giving you information which might lead your investigation. Right. So I can tell you, the thing is, for yourself and for whoever's viewing this, I believe this, because stuff has happened to me in this house that I can't explain. And I'm not talking about ghostly apparitions going through walls, which I do believe in. I've just never seen any in here myself. Never seen any at all. But it's not Disneyland tours. This is real. So you may go on your investigation and find absolutely zero. Very few people do. It's normally, there's something at least for anybody who's looking. And for some people, there's a lot in here. Quite well, a hell of a lot in here. If I tell you the history of the families that have been in this house, and some have been of some quite great significance, particularly in terms of who they are related to, it will start to lead your thoughts in a direction which I'd rather not, unless you insist. If you don't think it's going to affect you, I'll tell you who some of the people are that's lived here. And that then might mean that you might get names or connections with places that relate to what you now know is in this house. But the history of this house is known to me.
Yeah.
So I know the names of the people that lived here. I know how long they've lived here. We've done heavy research into the history of the building. I know when it became a private members club. I know when it became a nightclub. So I can tell you the whole timeline for this place. But most of what I tell you, particularly about the earlier part, other than generalities about Victoria Park, which is a fascinating area in itself.
So Victoria Park is just back outside of your front gate then?
Well, we're in it.
Oh,
this is part of Victoria Park. The
Right.
exterior wall of Victoria Park is just the other side of this wall. That was the outside wall of Victoria Park, and it ran in a great big loop all around this area, and the whole area was filled with Victorian mansions. And it was, you see, this I can tell you because this is general history without telling you too much about the people in the house.
Yeah.
It was a private gated community. You couldn't enter it without permission. It had its own police force, its own electricity, its own water supply. It was the footballers or the movie stars' exclusive residential area of the 1840s, built for the new industrial rich that were making their money in Manchester, and deliberately built here because it was a very rural area with a small village called Rusholme, which is just the other side of that wall over there, and it was nothing but fields. So they built this community just for people who would be, by today's standards, multi-millionaires, or maybe even bordering into the billionaire standard, because it was a short carriage ride from the city centre of Manchester. So you could go into your business in the city centre, you could travel out within about 30 minutes in a carriage, and you'd be away from all the smog and the crime and the crush of being in the world's first proper industrial city. And you'd be in a semi-rural area surrounded by people who were as wealthy as you, and that's the way these people wanted to live. And it carried on like that until I think it's about 1910, might be 1950, no, I mean, somewhere around 1910 to 1920, it was a completely enclosed community. The police weren't allowed to enter Victoria Park, I think, until 1930.
Right.
because it had its own equivalent of a police force.
Yeah.
So it was completely secluded, and you could get away literally with murder around here because they were their own bosses.
Yeah.
And these were people with heavy wealth and heavy influence.
So if something wanted to sort of say somebody wanted somebody sort of disappearing, you know, they've got the money to sort of buy people off, maybe buy the police off.
I think that's a very reasonable conclusion. Well, you don't need to buy them if you can frighten them.
True. Yeah.
And you're talking about, with the police force only coming in what was it, the 1870s? That's when the Peelers came in, is it, the Bobbies? Because Robert Peel was 1860, 1870. So you didn't even have a police force when this place was first established, but this place did, because it had its own people to keep people out, basically. So yeah, this was a proper first since the Middle Ages, when you had walled cities. This had been the first. I think it's the first, certainly in the UK, possibly in the whole of Europe, where they came up with this idea of gating an entire community. Now it's not so much of a big thing because there's lots of gated communities in wealthy areas all over the place.
Yes.
I think particularly of Hollywood, with all the movie stars, where they have their own security force, they have their own wall, etc., etc., etc. This was way, way, way before all of that, but for the same kind of wealthy people, to keep them separate from everybody else. Now that means we've been able to find out who they are and trace their history. So I could tell you who they are. And there's definitely one who I'm very curious about, because we know who he was and his family and all the connections, and he's got a very big connection with this place. Well, I mean, he lived there and his family did and so on. But very sketchy trying to find out what his particular business was.
Right.
And I'm teetering on going into detail that might lead you in certain directions. Now, if you want me to do that, I'm happy to do it. But if you want to save that until after your investigation, you'll have to ask me for a second conversation. In terms of what's happened to me, well, it happened to Marcus as well, who showed you around earlier on.
Yes.
Upstairs, we use it as a cinema room now, the ballroom.
Yes,
And I was sitting roughly where I am now, but upstairs, about a year ago. No, it'd be a bit more than a year, because it was in the summer, and it was warm evening, about 7 o'clock. And we were setting up the projector there to watch a movie, and I'm sat on my own, and I'm over on this side of the room. Now, when you go upstairs, there's glass windows up there, but they're triple glazed. We triple glazed them for soundproofing when it was a nightclub, and so there's nothing can come through there because it's absolutely airtight, and it was done for sound. Down here, as you can see, that used to be a window, and that's all bricked up, triple bricked.
Right.
Again, for the same reason. So this place is airless. I'm sat up there waiting for my friends to arrive and come and join me. And from left to right, so literally I'm sat like this, and left to right, a breeze went right through my body. And I've tried to explain it, and I can only explain it as cold but not unpleasant. So it didn't feel like there was any malignant intent. It wasn't like trying to chill me and make me feel unpleasant, but it was going through me. And it was a warm night, and it was a cold wind. And I looked up and I'm like, is one of them windows broken or something like that? And I'm like, no. And I sat there for a few minutes and I'm like, so something has been happening to me in this building. Because I've been knocking around this building for over 30 years. I used to come in here when it was a snooker club. So probably stuff like this has been happening to me for decades. And until we started to have ghost hunters like yourselves coming around, and I started to say, what should I be looking out for? What should I be listening out for? And people started to say, has this happened to you? Has that happened to you? Has the other happened to you? And I go, no. But then I just write that off as a gust of wind. And that's what I would have done. And so chances are this has happened again and again and again and again. And I paid no attention to it. But what confirmed it was the next night, there were 3 of us. So I was sat more or less where I'd been, but it's towards the middle of this room, but upstairs. Marcus was on my left, and there was another friend of ours called Manny sat on the other side, and we were waiting for the other people to arrive, and it happened again in exactly the same spot. And I noticed Manny and Marcus just jump up like that for a second. And I leaned forward and I said to Manny, what just happened to you? And he described almost exactly the same experience as I'd had the night before. And I said to Marcus, what happened to you? And he said, yeah, exactly the same. So you met Marcus tonight. So since then I've asked lots of people who've been up there and done investigations like yourself, and I keep getting from other people whether they know about what's happened to me or not, because in general I don't tell anyone until they've done their investigation. It's children running around in the ballroom upstairs. I call them the other residents. But this is my place, so they treat me with courtesy.
Yeah.
This has been a house since the 1840s till about 1921, when it then was turned into a private members club that opened in 1922. The Earl of Derby opened it, right? Now, while it was a house, you've had a lot of births, well, I suspect births, but certainly deaths in the building, because that was quite normal. Dying in a hospital is rather a modern thing. So there's definitely people died in this house, and we've found the names of the people that have died.
Okay.
Whether that means they've left anything behind or not, can't tell you, but definitely there's people that are deceased in this house. It goes on as two houses. It was originally two families living next to each other, and it was split down the middle of the place. Then in the 1870s, a very interesting person appears, and this is the person that converted it all into one house, and I think probably built that great big grand staircase in the middle, because that's right where the house would have been split in two. Now, this person was cousin to the King of Portugal, and the King of Portugal came to Manchester to visit him and caused a big palaver when they came to visit, because that was in the 1870s, and that was when monarchs ruled Europe, all of Europe. So this was a state visit by the head of state, the head of Portugal. And Portugal and the UK have had centuries of friendship. So Manchester City Council went into full overdrive and panic because they had a king with no announcement in their city. He'd just come to visit his cousin. But within 24 hours, there was a great big dinner arranged and a state parade and all a civic parade, and all the dignitaries came out to greet him. He just popped up to visit his cousin. Anyway, this guy is the reason that it's called Antwerp, because of his wife, who was from Belgium, and I suspect from Antwerp, right?
Right.
And he had, I think, 4 grand houses all around the world, all called Antwerp, because of his wife and because she pined for Belgium. Because even though they were a happy married couple and they had children, she always pined for her home country. So they called the houses they had around the world Antwerp. Now, this is a very interesting guy because he's clearly very wealthy, but all you can find out is that he was some kind of trader shipping stuff around the world.
Okay.
Don't know why. And this, I think, links to something else that's interesting about this place and Victoria Park in general. You remember when I was saying Victoria Park had a wall all around it, so the whole thing was a secure area. You had a few access points, but they had lodges on them, and you had security staff. So you couldn't just come in to see somebody in Victoria Park. You had to be invited, and you were vetted when you came in, and I'm quite sure they would have had some network of runners to go and check if your name wasn't on the books for somebody who was going to be coming in to visit, except for this place, because just over there to the right it had a separate entrance, and that separate entrance was in the outer wall of Victoria Park. So this is the only building, as far as I'm aware, that people could come in and go from with no reference to the actual security staff that are on the gates, and so therefore no record of them coming or going either. Don't know why, but it leads me to the suspicion this guy was getting up to all sorts of things that he didn't want any record of.
Yes.
Does sound a bit suspicious.
Yes, it does.
Then from the 1920s onwards, it was a Conservative club until about 15 years ago, and that's when Winston Churchill would have visited. Now, I don't have specific details of him visiting, but apparently, I think it was after the war, but it could have been during the war. He went and visited every Conservative club in the entire country, and this was a very significant and important one for Manchester. So he will have been here, no shadow of a doubt about it. Finding an actual record of it would be nice, but there's no doubt that he would have come here. And he'd been an MP for Manchester. I think it was the Oldham Division it was called.
Yeah.
And I think it was around about, was it after the Boer War? It was. It must have been around about the 1900s. But he was a Liberal MP for one of the Manchester divisions, as they were called at the time. So he almost certainly knew this place and knew this area, because Manchester was where he was first elected as an MP. Then it rolls on to about 15 years ago when I got it and turned it into my nightclub, which was Antwerp Mansion, and that ran for about 10 years until just before lockdowns, and when we stopped doing music events here. And I still do music events but elsewhere. I use other people's venues, and that's when we then expanded the opportunity for other people to use the building, because even though nightclubs only open at night, it's busy all during the day, so you couldn't do anything else. You were busy all day preparing for the night you were going to do, then cleaning up afterwards, then preparing for the next night, and so on. So since then we've been doing ghost hunts. It must be for about 5 years now, and with ever increasing results and ever increasing numbers coming through, along with the art events we do and the photography that we do and the music videos that we do here as well. And the building, it's always been lively and full of fun, this place, and full of activity, which might be why people get such good results when they're coming around here. And so far, relatively little that's unpleasant. I think people might have slightly unpleasant experiences because they get a bit worried.
Yeah.
And some of the people around here that I've heard from, some of the people who are not on this plane of existence, are not always the most welcoming. But there doesn't appear to be anything that's particularly bad here.
Right.
So I keep getting stories that are similar, and some people are not particularly welcoming, particularly not to females, but then it was a gentleman's club for a very, very long time.
Different
Right.
than one, yeah.
So, along with all this history, was there any documented murders?
No.
Nothing like that whatsoever.
But
so
you-
it's basically
you
just
see,
mainly natural deaths type of thing.
If you're living in a gated community in 1840 and you're the equivalent of at least a multi-millionaire, if not a billionaire, if you're connected to royalty, if you
They'll
have
get
a,
away with
if you have a
murder.
little legal problem and the police force aren't even allowed onto the area, problems can go away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rich people can make little problems go away.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
in terms of documented, you're talking about a time before the police force.
Okay.
Didn't exist.
Right.
So the chances are, if something did happen here, we'd never
We
know
don't
about
know.
it. If anything had happened here, we wouldn't know about it.
That's fine. Well, thank you very, very much
You're welcome.
for the information.
Thank you.
And we shall see you when we've done.
See you on the other side.
Yes, see you on the flip side.
Right, enjoy yourselves.
We will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.